from Pretoria. Is everything all right? People talk, say things.
Hello?
Why didn't you tell me it was out of order? I suppose you think that's funny.
I'm not allowed out the front door.
Who says you weren't?
Them.
Who?
Them.
It was terrible out there. I could hear breathing.
We told you.
Are you worried about the man?
They hate us. That's the truth. They want to kill and torture every one of us. You can see it in their eyes.
Come now, Frederick. Do you dream about unholy things?
I really don't like what's going on here. There's something wrong, and that's a fact.
Wait. What did you dream last night? This manifestation of evil. You must be delivered from evil.
I believe you are quite aware the situation has changed since last we spoke.
The truth is still the truth, and a bargain is still a bargain.
And Mayor Cermak is now deceased.
Yes. What does that have to do with our contract?
I do not recall signing a contract with you, Mr. Eller.
We had a verbal agreement. I'm sure my uncle here will attest to that.
Nathan, please. You're being most rude.
But Dawes reacted just as I knew he would.
Lewis, as a family man, I quite understand your position. As for you, young Mr. Heller, you should not have spoken to the papers of this. It was a breach of confidence.
Nothing was said of our arrangement being a confidential one. Besides which, I was in fact discreet.
How so?
I didn't tell the reporters why I was offered the job at the fair. Void our deal, sir, and I'm going to be put into an embarrassing light. I will have to inform the press of your involvement.
This reeks of blackmail, young man.
It reeks of business. Our arrangement is binding in my view, and if you feel differently, I'll be noisy about it.
Nathan.
I'm not a big wheel like you, General, but us little wheels can get good and goddamn squeaky when we don't get our grease.
My secretary will have contracts ready for you to sign this afternoon at 4. Please return and sign them. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Observations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your evangelist of the imagination, and of course, the perhaps never to be defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right, moi, Robert Meyer Burnett, and I am robcasting at you imagination connoisseurs, you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community, coming at you from the Rob Observatory with Rob Observations episode number 1029. You know, I wasn't going to even do a show today. I have been talking about tariffs, movie tariffs all day. And I was like, maybe I'll just take a break tonight, right? Cut it. But I figured, I can't help it. My quest for knowledge just continues on. I can't stop thinking about all of this stuff. And I came across a very long article that I stumbled across as I was waiting for Sophie, Elizabeth's youngest daughter, to go grocery shopping. I was sitting in the parking lot and scrolling as I do through the news, and I found a really great article in The Atlantic. And some people go, oh, The Atlantic, it's so partisan, or whatever. It's not partisan. It's got, I guess it is. Maybe, could be, but this is not a partisan article, and that's not what we're going to talk about. We're not going to really talk politics. We're going to talk pop culture. And I think about pop culture a lot. Go with me on this, but on Let's Get Physical Media, one of the things I acquired, I showed this. So I went to Crunchyroll, and Crunchyroll had a Crunchyroll exclusive of this. Across Zero, the OVA series. Of course, Crunchyroll and their very expensive, beautiful Blu-ray boxes that have the disc and all kinds of anime swag, and I was thinking about the fact that I first saw Macross, of course, Robotech. Carl Masick, Harmony, was it Harmony Gold? Bringing Robotech to America in the mid-'80s. Now, growing up, my first experience with anime was, of course, Speed Racer. And I to this day, I love Speed Racer. And then, of course, there was Marine Boy. And then in junior high school, my jam, even to this day, is, it as Star Blazers. I knew it first as Star Blazers, but it is Space Battleship Yamato. I loved Space Battleship Yamato. And I never even got to see the third season, the Bowler Wars, because it was never broadcast in. They changed the voice acting anyway, so I got to see the first season, the Iskandar storyline, and then the Common Empire storyline, and I loved it. And then moving into, then after that, Space Battleship Yamato started in '74 in Japan, and then in '79, Mobile Suit Gundam debuted, which was at first a failure. If you think about it now, it's pretty funny to think that, but Mobile Suit Gundam was a failure. And they took what they had and they made it into the three Gundam movies, and that was the first series. And then, of course, if you talk about Gundam now, like, I'm a Universal Century guy, so I'm a Gundam purist. But anyway, I didn't know much about Gundam, and in terms of the Universal Century, it really hadn't expanded. The Principality of Zeon and the Earth Federation, that was all good. But then Robotech came out, and I, of course, loved Robotech. And Robotech, if you remember, was actually 3 Japanese animated series. It was Macross, it was Southern Cross, and Genesis Climber Mospida. And so those were all cut together, and, proto-culture and all that stuff. They kind of gave it a continuity. But anyway, it got me thinking. And then, of course, the granddaddy, well, not the granddaddy, but the thing that changed the perception of anime and anime. People say anime, but it's really anime. What changed the perception of Japanese animation in our culture was Akira. And the first time I ever saw Akira, I had read about Akira. What I didn't even know it was based on a huge manga series. I just saw images. And when I was at my very first San Diego Comic-Con in the summer of 1988, I was before there was the convention center even existed. I just moved to California to go to USC. And I bought a Japanese laser disc of Akira that, of course, did not have English subtitles. And we were able to, my roommate and I, we coerced a Japanese exchange student at USC to come to our house. And we actually made that poor kid sit there and translate what was going on. And if you've seen Akira, and why shouldn't you? You can get it on 4K now. It's got a great banger soundtrack too. So you should watch it if you haven't seen it. And better yet, get the box set of manga. I have it right over there. Read it, because the mangas will blow your mind. The movie's just kind of a very truncated version of the story. Why do I bring all this up? Because that was just one sliver of the pop culture that was exploding in the 80s. But I was a kid in the 70s, and I became a teenager and went into college and had my young adult time in the 80s. And the interesting thing about living in the 80s, and I'm not going back, I'm not saying the 80s was better, but what was happening for fans of science fiction, fantasy, and horror, I just use the general term genre fan. If you were a genre fan, there was so much exploding at the time in various forms. Comic books were one form. Comic books and anime were one form. And the comic book revolution of the 80s, you cannot, we're still feeling it right now, today. And what I mean was, you had a major thing happen, which was the direct sale market. So for those of you who don't know, when I was a little kid, I bought all my comics on spindle racks at like 7-Eleven or Lakeside Drugs or Looks Drugs, where I'm from, on Mercer Island, Washington. That's my hometown. It's a suburb of Seattle. It's between Bellevue and Seattle, on an island, a real island. I could never afford to live there today. But I'm going back to my reunion this summer. But anyway, so what was going on is that forms, traditional forms, like the comic book form, was changing. In America, comics had always been seen as disposable. In the 60s, they were a form of the counterculture. You had a lot of underground comics, a lot of body or X-rated or drug-fueled comics were a big part of the counterculture. But superhero comics dominated in the United States. Of course, there was romance. There used to be like romance comics, and there was pirate comics, Tales of the Black Freighter. There was all those kinds of things, horror comics, EC comics. But they were not considered by any stretch of the imagination highbrow. But in the 80s, pop culture comics exploded because the direct sale market happened. And the direct sale market was comic book stores, where comic books were starting to be released only in comic book stores. And that means they could circumvent the Comics Code Authority, and suddenly the big two, DC and Marvel, could publish adult-themed material that they couldn't before. And then you had indie comics publishers publishing their own superhero comics, sci-fi comics, fantasy comics, sexual comics like Omaha the Cat Dancer. First comics I fell in love with Howard Chaykin's American Flag. DC Comics published like Frank Miller's Ronin in a prestige format. They changed newsprint to Baxter paper, like the Teen Titans and the Legion of Superheroes for DC became Baxter paper books. Omega Men, where Lobo was introduced, was a Baxter paper book. It was heavier, thicker paper. First time I saw it was Camelot 3000, that miniseries. And what happened was, and then not only that, you had authors like Stephen King and Peter Straub, horror novelists, genre novelists, science fiction novelists, movies were exploding. MTV came in, and the influence of MTV started to change the way movies looked. You could go back to movies like Flashdance and The Hunger. Simpson Bruckheimer with Flashdance put that music video aesthetic. You could cut films quicker. Movies started to look, there was this confluence of the way things look. Blade Runner, the influx of British commercial directors coming to America like Alan Parker and Ridley and Tony Scott, Adrian Lyne, and they brought that look that was futuristic and modern and cool. You had an incredible influence of pop music and fashion, and pop music gained a new resonance because people were watching music videos. Now, there had been concert videos and there had been music video clips. I mean, even Kate Bush was doing music video clips in the late 70s, but it was changing. And what was really interesting about it all was feeding on itself. So it wasn't just like you could be a fan of one thing, but then it would sort of gel into something else. And the attitudes would change. Like, while nobody actually, Blade Runner was not a hit, but Blade Runner 2 years later, you had William Gibson's breakthrough debut novel Neuromancer come out, and suddenly there was a new term, cyberpunk. What did that mean? It was a combination of, and then of course computers themselves were beginning to explode. I remember my neighbor Pete Chambers had like an Apple IIc, and he had a game called Soft Porn Adventure, which was a text game that took like an hour to load on a cassette tape. But computer technology was exploding, and it seemed like the future was coming at us, and everything was really exciting. And music, there was all different kinds of music. You could listen to rock and roll, traditional rock and roll. You had people like Phil Collins kind of crossed over, even though he'd come from Genesis, which used to be the Peter Gabriel led, call it kind of prog rock. Frank Zappa said sometimes Genesis was prog rock. But the point was, there was all this evolution going on as well. David Bowie, Aladdin Sane became Let's Dance. And it was a really crazy time. And because the culture, like MTV, could bring us all of those things. They would give us the music, but they would do news shows and talk about, and they started to report on all around the world. 120 Minutes late night on Saturday nights brought us all kinds of new stuff. And the thing was, at least for me, because I was, I loved all this stuff. I loved movies. I loved music. I loved novels, books. I loved Japanese animation, of course, Japanese films. Home video was also exploding, so everybody started to become, movie experts, and you were I need to get a bootleg of Lucio Fulci's The Beyond, and now, of course, I just bought the ultimate version of Lucio Fulci's The Beyond on 4K from Grindhouse Releasing, which, by the way, if you're a fan of that movie, it's one of the greatest releases of the year. Could be, it goes to top 5 so far of physical media releases of 2025. But it was really exciting. And there was never, no one would have ever said, oh, that sucked. You never heard that. You never heard anybody say, well, that sucked. It might not have been very good, but it was still interesting. And the thing is, you had to go get this stuff. You had to go find it. You had to go to the record store and rifle through. Like, I was buying music at Tower. I was buying 12-inch remixes of stuff. And, I remember my friend Shade Roop gave me what looked like, an old floppy disk. It was a 12-inch old floppy disk. And, of course, New Order's Blue Monday. It hadn't been released on their album Power, Corruption, and Lies. It was only released as a single. Well, as a 12-inch single. Fucking mind-blowing. I put it on, I was like, oh my God. I started listening to The Cure and Depeche Mode. And I would go to the record store. I'd go to Tower Records, and I was going through the import section, and I would just buy stuff. I didn't even know what it was. You'd buy stuff and take it home and be like, what is this? Factory Records. Then I discovered like 4AD. The record label 4AD, and like the record the company 23 Envelope that did all their design work. The design work for a record label, which became part of its appeal. Like, oh my God, it's another 4AD record. I wouldn't even know who the band was. Throwing Muses? What the fuck are they? First modern English album, I'll Stop the World and Melt With You, was on 4AD. I mean, it was, but you had to seek it out. And that's what made it so exciting. You were your own prime mover. Like, you were going out and you were finding this stuff. You would go see the show when they came to town, if these bands would come to town. There was all kinds of stuff to go see. There were film festivals to see movies that you'd never heard of before. There was music you had never heard. And then, of course, there were, in Seattle, we had a radio station called KYYX, which started playing more cutting-edge music. And so it was a great, great, great time. And everything I was interested in, science fiction, fantasy, and horror stuff, movies were exploding because we were in the wake of Star Wars, Alien, Superman, and the summer of 1982, where you had everything from Conan the Barbarian to Rocky III to The Road Warrior to Blade Runner to Poltergeist to E.T. to Tron to The Thing. I mean, in 2 months, it was fucking crazy. And it was amazing. And then, of course, everything fed into everything else. Like, I'd already heard of the band Bauhaus, and like I've talked about it before. Then suddenly there's Bauhaus singing Bela Lugosi's Dead in the opening scenes of Tony Scott's The Hunger. It's like, Peter Murphy is in a movie? A movie with David Bowie himself. I mean, David Bowie and Catherine Deneuve. I mean, it was out of control. Out of control. And it made youth pop culture, especially for genre fans, if you wanted to go, it was so much fun. And there was always, it made it really easy to date. Because, as much as I liked all this other stuff, I liked the ladies as well. So there was always a place to go. There was always a show to see. And, you could take I was 16, but I had girlfriends and we'd go places. We could do stuff. There's always places to go. Go to the record store. You could make mixtapes and give them to people, and you could share it all. I mean, it was like, oh my God. We went and saw Madonna, and who opened for Madonna? The fucking Beastie Boys on the License to Ill tour. It was crazy. And that was even later. That was more in the latter half of high school, but that was mid 80s. I mean, it was crazy fun and crazy exciting. And there were things new. I mean, back then, Return of the Jedi came out the same year that Flashdance and the same year that The Hunger came out in 1983. So Star Wars fever was at a fever pitch. You know, you're finishing off the trilogy. And again, it was just so exciting. All of this stuff that we now talk about on a daily basis here on the YouTubes was all of it wasn't embryonic because we were getting things fully formed, but no one had ever seen before. So it was all new, and it all fed into the same thing. Anyway, you kind of get the point. And you take your pick. You could specialize in whatever you wanted to specialize in. I had friends that were really into music. That was their jam. But the thing is, we collected all this stuff. We were interested in all of this stuff because they were facets of our own personality. They kind of defined us. We were defined by our interests. You know, we would have to go out, and what was so much fun was sharing those interests with other people. Like going to the record store with a friend was exciting because they would show you something that you didn't know, and then you could trade tapes with one another. And then of course you had the radio station that was playing if you liked the Second British Invasion, if you liked Depeche Mode and you liked New Order and you liked The Cure and you liked all the more obscure bands that were on labels like Beggar's Banquet or 23 Envelope or on 4AD, you could share those too. And it was really, 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 really exciting. But there was never anybody who said, yeah, it sucked. Nothing sucked. Everything was like, well, what is this? Let's go get it. I gotta read this. I gotta find this. I gotta listen to this. I gotta see this. You know, I became a video bootlegger. I was setting video cameras up in theaters. Just saying, paying people off. But it was exciting because why? Somebody might have had a bootleg of Bill Lustig's Maniac and it hadn't opened on the West Coast yet. And I'd be like, oh, because Maniac opened on the East Coast first. Movies didn't open all at once. You know, getting Dawn of the Dead as a bootleg videotape was pretty exciting, I will say. And then, of course, that was even another thing. You know, I had Fantasia and E.T. I had bootlegs of Fantasia and E.T. And let me tell you, lucrative. It was a lucrative time. It was a fun time. It was an exciting time. Cut to today. The difference is we, and I don't just mean me, I mean everybody in the social media sphere, whether you're on TikTok, whether you're on Instagram, whether you're on YouTube, whether you have a show, whatever, we are now the pop culture. We as pundits, it's almost like, first of all, the work that we're getting, I'll give you an example. Comic books. You know, and to be honest, full disclosure, I mean, I frequented comic books. I went every week to the comic book store for 30 years, starting in the early 80s. And I kind of I quit around 2010. And it wasn't that I didn't like comics. You know, it was just that, like, superhero comics were repeating themselves. Like, I love the X-Men. I was so bored. I mean, every X-Men story had been told until Hickman's Krakoan era, but only Hickman could write it correctly. I mean, that's not true. There were other people that wrote it well, but the Krakoan era brought me back to the X-Men. I'm like, oh, okay. It was interesting. I mean, there's only so many superhero stories you can tell, and if you've been reading the same comic for 30 years, you've pretty much covered all that ground. So there was good. I'm not saying there weren't good comics. Because there were good comics, and there are good comics being created. But the thing is, they're all variations on themes that have been done. And you can say, well, you know, Rob, the things that were happening. No, I have to tell you, while someone could probably do a treatise on Frank Miller's Ronin and talk about how it has its roots in somewhere else, let me tell you, when I saw Ronin, this was post-Daredevil and pre-Dark Knight Returns. When I saw Frank Miller's Ronin, I love samurai. I love Asian-influenced stuff. And when I read Ronin, I'm like, what the hell is this? And I read it and puzzled over it, and it was incredibly exciting to see that kind of stuff. This doesn't happen much anymore. Because the difference is, and I've said this on this channel before, we are no longer looking outward for new things. I think we're looking outward for connections with people, but we're not looking outward for art the way we used to. we used to have to go out and find things that defined us. Now the things are coming into us. We're getting them through social media. That's where a lot of really exciting stuff is look, I discovered, I mentioned the band Polyphia. You know, how did I find Polyphia? Not through the airwaves, not through somebody's giving me a CD. I found Polyphia on online, you know, and found out about them. And then, but the thing is, they themselves became as interesting as their music. And that's sort of the difference. Before, we only had what the creators had created. We didn't know much about them. You know, with comics, you'd get like Amazing Heroes, and somebody would read Peter David's column or something and find something out you didn't know. But now it's all kind of the artist and their work have become kind of this singular thing. You know, Taylor Swift is every girl's best friend, or every best friend girl wishes they had. But Taylor Swift as a personality is as much, I mean, her music, everyone knows that half of her music's about breaking up with a boyfriend, and they all want to know who the boy is and all that. And that becomes, her persona becomes as much a part. I don't know why they keep choking my channel off. It's a YouTube thing. It's not a me thing. It's a YouTube thing. And by the way, if you look at Robservations, I'm broadcasting in HD. They're only archiving my shows in standard def, which I have no idea why. But anyway, like for me, I'll hear things still like Lana Del Rey. Not necessarily somebody I liked video games, Summertime Sadness. I love those things. But like I bought her album, Norman fucking Rockwell, right? So I'm listening to Norman fucking Rockwell, and I was late to that party. I bought it like 2 years after it came out, maybe even 3. And then I was driving down to Comic-Con, and I put on that album, and I'm like, this album is a fucking masterpiece. The lyrics, I was like, this record is amazing. The lyrics are amazing. It really spoke to my whole experience of living in California for 35 years. And I'm like, but what was interesting about it is then I went back and I'm reading this record. I'm reading all about this record. I went and read all the reviews of this record, and everybody generally said it was a masterpiece. Totally passed me by. I wasn't paying much attention to Lana Del Rey. And it made me think, I'm like, am I too old? Like, is it because I'm no longer seeking this stuff out anymore? Like, how did I miss this? Because this was something that appealed to me. It used to be, I would never miss something like that. But somehow, yeah, I did. But now I discovered it. Have I now gone back to listen to a lot of Lana Del Rey? Yeah. But nothing speaks to me the way her album Norman fucking Rockwell does, let me tell you. But so there is great stuff out there, but I find that I'm finding it on online, but there's very little. Like, I don't have friends that are particularly into music. My friend Mary Forrest always had great taste in music. She was always giving me, her taste skewed more to those kind of indie emo bands, which were fine, but she had great taste in music. I don't talk to her very much anymore, but she had terrific taste in music. She would make these Comic-Con music compilations that were terrific, and she was somebody that kind of kept me abreast of music that I should hear or whatever. And it's just different now because nothing is particularly new, or is it? I mean, it seems creators. Here's something. There's a YouTube creator, Instagram creator named Giacomo Turo, and you stumble across. There's a controversy about Giacomo Turo, and I'm like, I don't even know who this fucking guy is, but I went down a rabbit hole. And this guy, Giacomo Turo, was apparently stealing he's a bass player. Like during the pandemic, I discovered a lot of people like Davey504. For you slappers, you know who Davey504 is. He's got now 13 million subscribers on YouTube. I love Davey504. All he does is slap at the bass, but I thought he was really funny. And I would watch his short videos and what's up? Slappers. Just a rando dude that I was incredibly talented. I loved watching him play, and I loved his shtick about the bass. So there was something about this guy, Giacomo Turo, that I just found the other day, and apparently this guy, Giacomo Turo, was stealing other YouTubers and other Instagram players recording their riffs and then pretending to play those riffs on his own channel and passing them off on his own. I mean, even Rick Beato, one of my favorite YouTubers, he's got a great channel, weighed in on this controversy. And it's so weird now that our world, like, why would anyone want to fake? People want clout so much. They would rather rip off someone else's work and try and pass it off as their own. To me, that's like absurd, because eventually you're going to be discovered. You're going to have to be able to play live. You're going to have to, the whole point of what you watch. I mean, how joyous is it to see some 8-year-old Chinese girl who can shred on the drums, and like she'll play like Thunderstruck or something, and you're like, oh my God, that's amazing. And what you're amazed by is the talent. With the rise of America's Got Talent, or Britain's Got Talent, or the World's Got Talent. I like watching, Czechoslovakia's Got Talent, whatever. I just love seeing the amazing talent that people can showcase on the internet. I mean, but you just assume that they are really that talented. And I know lots of people want to fake stuff, but why? When you're gonna play music, eventually you're gonna have to sit in front of people and play music. That's why I really like Polyphia, because I'm like, oh my God, the musicianship on display is just stunning. And that's what I think. But it's very different, because everybody's going to see, or everybody gets involved, especially on the internet. There's a billion different things you can find, and you can go down these rabbit holes. There's nothing that defines us anymore, especially as fans. All that remains that really defines us, and I know this from my YouTube channel, I can talk about whatever I want. I could sit there, people should be like, Rob, you should do a book channel. You should do a thing about books. And I'm like, the funny thing about books is I think about a channel like Quinn's Ideas, or even Nerd Cookies. Quinn's Ideas and Nerd Cookies, and one of my favorite YouTubers, Impression Blend. They go into books. They talk about books. They do it better than I could. I mean, I've never tried it. I could probably wax rhapsodic about all these books that I talk about. But they do, I love watching Quinn's Ideas. I love watching his channel on various science fiction novels. So those are great. But they're the only thing that people get excited about, where you can make a video and you'll get tons of views, is Marvel and Star Wars. That's it. Like, I would get people that would watch my favorite, I was just watching somebody counting down the 5 best Duran Duran records. I'm a huge Duran Duran fan. No one is going to tune in. I know someone's actually writing, I love it if you did the top 10 Duran Duran records. No one's going to tune in. I mean, some people will, and, that's great. But for the most part, that doesn't interest anybody. And I'm not playing an algorithm. If I should, this channel, I think, would be much more successful. But I just don't. I don't do that. But we no longer have a pop culture that unites us the way pop culture used to unite science fiction, fantasy, and horror fans. And I think part of the reason that is because we're not going out to get something. If we're not having shared experiences out in the world. I mean, you have friends that you go see movies with, certainly. But what you end up doing is you end up coming back home and talking about it on the internet. And I used to do that. I would do that online when things first started, like in the early 90s. I'd love to go to Star Trek BBS boards, or then when AOL had Star Trek boards, they were always really interesting to go into, and you get in flame wars with people. But it wasn't like you weren't going places. You weren't, it's just different now. But I also think that the thing about Star Wars and Marvel, even Thunderbolts, is the 36th Marvel movie. Like, when I was growing up, there were 3 Star Wars movies, and that was enough. You always wondered, well, maybe there'll be more one day. I mean, there were, at the time in the 80s, there was like 10 James Bond movies, maybe 11 or something. I don't know. But nowadays, all anybody cares about are these 2 entities that are owned by Disney. Look, I love Star Wars and I love Marvel. I love comics. I love the Infinity Saga, the first 23 movies. People, like, I get yelled at because I say I like the Eternals. Is the Eternals great? Is it a great MCU movie? No, but it's an interesting science fiction film. If I saw that movie in like 1978 and it wasn't part of the MCU and it was just the way it is now, I would have loved it. I would have been like, this is awesome. You know, because we didn't have that whole, I'm not judging it against Infinity War and Endgame. And now that you have those, you can't not judge things. And that's the only thing that surrounds us and binds us. Anyway, it's a different world, and I think our pop culture is seriously lacking. And I'm not the only one. Now that I've opined for, 30 minutes, I did find it's a very long article, and it is in The Atlantic, and it was published today. And it's pretty heady. And I want to read it. I want to share it with y'all because I think it's worth sharing. It's worth pondering. It's what I like to do on my channel, which is throw out ideas, and sometimes I'm just throwing out ideas, to see what people have to say about them. It's all about the discussion, and it's all about pondering and what do you think? But before I jump into the article, I just want to see if anybody is, let me make sure if I want to catch up on super chats and things. The Dead Man has been a member of the channel for 24 months. Michael Gustafson said, I just picked up the 4K of Macross Do You Remember Love? Zeta Gundam is my all-time favorite mecha. Powerful stuff they were writing. Zeta Gundam was great. It still is great. Great stuff. So you're absolutely right there. The Dead Man says, funny you talk about Space Battleship Yamato because someone complained on Nerdrotic today that you don't talk about Yamato. Meaning I don't talk about Yamato? Or people on Nerdrotic Show? Why would people on Nerdrotic Show complain I don't talk about Space Battleship Yamato? Let me tell you about Yamato. I just finished up the last Hachette Space Battleship Yamato Part Works, 1/350th scale. If you saw this, this wall is packed with lots of stuff, but Yamato parts. I don't talk about Space Battleship Yamato. I'm pissed that I haven't seen Rebel 3199. But it is on Crunchyroll, I've heard. But I want to get the discs. That's so weird that somebody said that I don't talk about it. Well, you can't talk about everything, but if you want me to talk about Space Battleship Yamato, I will tell you this. What they did was they've been doing something really interesting. They've been reimagining the original Yamato. So the original stories, like they redid the Iskandar storyline. It was a banger. Really great. The rest, the 2202, 2205, and I haven't seen 3199, Rebel 3199 yet. But they weren't as good as the original remake back in 2012. But it's really, really good. Really, really good. So there you go. I've talked about it. See, I talked about it just today, just now. Tapman12 says, any recommendations for fun books like Project Hail Mary? Project Hail Mary is a very fun book. People have asked about that. Here's a book that is totally fun that I've been recommending to people. It has an element of time travel in it, and don't read anything about it. I've recommended this book a lot, but everybody I've told to read it has had a great time. It's called Replay, and it's by Ken Grimwood. Now, don't read anything about it. Just pick it up and read it, and I guarantee you 5 pages you'll be locked in. But it's fun like Project Hail Mary. Is it heady? No. It's very easy reading. It's kind of like it'll remind you of a Stephen King story, but it's not Stephen King. And I think you'll enjoy it. Destiny Captain has been a member of the channel for 20 months. Is this all that I am? Is there nothing more? This simple feeling. He's quoting Star Trek The Motion Picture. The Brujo says, for books and editing, the nonsense-free editor is great. So sharp, insightful, and funny, being easy on the eye is just a bonus. I don't know the nonsense-free editor. Sounds like it's right up my alley, though. Haviland says, hi, Rob, are you going to talk about the tariffs on movies and what could happen to the movie industry in the U.S. and worldwide? Well, that's what my show was about last night. as soon as I read all this, I was like, oh my God, I need to talk about this. So last night's Robservation was all about tariffs. That's all it was about. Talked about them on the John Campea show today and also on Chris Gore's Verses. But last night's Robservations was all about tariffs. Blue Sunrise says, Rob, are you excited for the Gundam movie with Sydney Sweeney? Is that true? I mean, I've been waiting for the Gundam. Look, man, when the RX-78 showed up in Ready Player One, I was like, yes. But my favorite Gundam is the new Gundam. And then, of course, I like Wing Zero. The full on, the feathers and all. But New Gundam is my favorite with the foils or whatever. I didn't know if Sydney Sweeney, she's supposed to be in the Gundam movie. I hope so, but I'm all about Char. Isn't everybody? Who's going to play the Red Comet? BCH says Ronin was a what the fuck moment. Still a favorite of mine. I agree. Polly from Latino Slant is here. I love you, Vato. Do you know? Wait, what was the I'd mentioned something randomly about Blood In, Blood Out, and the anniversary was just the other day of Blood In, Blood Out, which was very, very exciting. 1001 Johnny sends in a tip and says, I think fandom should be encouraged to stop focusing on the lore of our franchises. We desperately need to infuse deep thought about our favorite stories. We need nerd scholars that break down the meanings of our stories rather than regurgitating lore. That's interesting. I mean, you've always helped me out. You've given me a lot to think about. World building, that's something I'm still thinking about. Okay, I'm going to jump into this article. And this is, again, it is a long article, but I definitely think it is worth, and it's music heavy. But it's a really interesting article. It was published today in The Atlantic. And the name of the article, hang on. The name of this article is actually, is this the worst ever era of American pop culture? I know. Is it the worst ever? Oh, man, I hate when that happens. Look what I've done. I set this whole thing up, and it gets all messed up. Live on the air. I set this all up. So is this the worst ever era? This is by Spencer Cornaber, and the illustrations are by Javier Jean. I'm sure I messed that one up. But let's start this one. Last year, by the way, this is published today. Last year, I visited the music historian Ted Gioia. I think Ted Gioia. Last year, I visited the music. Can't even read this. Last year, I visited the music historian Ted Gioia to talk about the death of civilization. He welcomed me into his suburban Texas home and showed me to a sunlit library. At the center of the room, arranged neatly on a countertop, stood 41 books. These, he said, were the books I needed to read. The display included all 7 volumes of Edward Gibbon's 18th century opus, The Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. Both volumes of Oswald Spengler's World War I era tract, The Decline of the West, and a 2,500-year-old account of the Peloponnesian War by Thucydides, who was the first historian to look at his own culture, Greece, and say, I'm going to tell you the story of how stupid we were, Gioia explained. Gioia's contributions to this lineage of doomsaying have made him into something of an internet celebrity. For most of his career, he was best known for writing about jazz. But with his Substack newsletter, The Honest Broker, he's attracted a large and avid readership by taking on contemporary culture and arguing that it's terrible. America's creative energy has been sapped, he told me, and the results can be seen in the diminished quality of arts and entertainment, with knock-on efforts to the country's happiness and even its political stability. He's not alone in fearing that we've entered a cultural dark age. According to a recent YouGov poll, Americans rate the 2020s as the worst decade in a century, for music, movies, fashion, TV, and sports. I know some of you are going to say TV hasn't been around yet for a century. I know. A 2023 story in the New York Times Magazine declared that we're in the least innovative, least transformative, least pioneering century for culture since the invention of the printing press. An art critic for The Guardian recently proclaimed that the avant-garde is dead. What's so jarring about these declarations of malaise is that we should logically be in a renaissance. The internet has caused a Cambrian explosion of creative expression by allowing artists to execute and distribute their visions with unprecedented ease. More than 500 scripted TV shows get made every year. Streaming services reportedly add about 100,000 songs every day. We have podcasts that cater to every niche passion and video games of novelistic sophistication. Technology companies like to say that they've democratized the arts, enabling exciting collisions of ideas from unlikely talents. Yet, no one seems very happy about the results. To a certain extent, such negativity may simply reflect an innate human tendency to fret about decline. Some of the most liberating developments in history have first triggered fears of social stultification. The advent of the printing press caused the 15th century thinkers to complain of mass distraction. Same as it ever was. In 1964, The Atlantic published an essay predicting, not unpersuasively, that rock and roll would only foster conformity and consumerism in young Americans. For as long as I've been a critic of this magazine, I've tried to cut against the declinist impulse, or declinist, I think it's declinist, impulse. The year I started the job, 2011, was a turning point of sorts. Spotify launched in America that July. Netflix debuted its first original series soon after. The brainy rock bands that I'd grown up loving, Radiohead, Wilco, were starting to fade in importance. But pop, hip-hop, and electronic music were cross-pollinating in fascinating ways. Understanding change and appreciating how human creativity flourishes anew in each era always seemed to be the point of the job. Yet, the 2020s have tested my optimism. The chaos of TikTok, the disruption of the pandemic, and the threat of AI have destabilized any coherent story of progress, driving the arts forward. In its place, a narrative of decay has taken hold, evangelized by critics such as Joia. They're citing very real problems: Hollywood's regurgitation of intellectual property, partisan culture wars hijacking actual culture, unsustainable economic conditions for artists, the addicting, distracting effects of modern technology. I wanted to meet with some of the most articulate pessimists to test the validity of their ideas and to see whether a story other than decline might yet be told. Previous periods of change have yielded great artistic breakthroughs. Industrialization begat Romanticism. World War I awakened the modernists. Either something similar is happening now, and we're not yet able to see it, or we really have, at last, slid into the wasteland. Stagnation. In 312 CE, the Roman Senate ordered the construction of a gaudy monument called the Arch of Constantine. It incorporated pieces from older monuments, built in more glorious times for the empire, which had begun its centuries-long decline. The arch is one of Gioia's favorite metaphors for modern culture. The TV and film industry is enamored of reboots, spin-offs, and formulaic genre fare. Broadway theaters subsist on stunt cast revivals of old war horses. Book publishers rely disproportionately on backlist sales. Entertainment companies have long understood the power of giving people more of what they already like. But recommendation algorithms take that logic to a new extreme, keeping us swiping endlessly for slight variations on our favorite things. In every sector of society, Gioia told me, we're facing powerful forces that want to impose stagnation on us. If Bach were alive today, he'd spend a few weeks trying to break into the LA music scene and say, I'll be a hedge fund manager instead. The problem is particularly acute in music. In 2024, new releases accounted for little more than a quarter of the albums consumed in the U.S. Every year, a greater and greater percentage of the albums streamed online is catalog music, meaning it's at least 18 months old. Hoping to remonetize the classics, record labels and private equity firms have spent billions of dollars to acquire artists' publishing rights. The reemergence of Kate Bush's Running Up That Hill on the Billboard Hot 100 in 2022, 37 years after its release, seemed to signal that this was a good bet. A brief placement in the popular TV show Netflix's Stranger Things, itself a pastiche of 1980s movie tropes, could, it turned out, cause an old hit to outcompete most of the newer songs in the world. Music is turning into a rights management business, Gioia said. There are vested interests now that don't want new music to flourish. The private equity funds just want you to listen to the same songs over and over again because they own them. The ultimate effect, he thinks, is to discourage true, daring artistry. And then the quote about Bach. If Bach were alive today, he'd spend a few weeks trying to break into the LA music scene and say, I'll be a hedge fund manager instead. I would argue, what LA music scene? Gioia, 67, knows something about greatness thwarted. He started his career as a consultant, working for Boston Consulting Group and McKinsey, but he moonlighted as a jazz pianist, releasing 2 albums and gigging around the world. At one pulled off abstractions. I've often found myself swept away by the force of his convictions. Still, I nurse some doubts about his claim that the arts are frozen in amber. In a viral Substack post titled, "Is Old Music Killing New Music?" later republished in The Atlantic, Gioia described omens of stagnation in everyday life, such as when he encountered a youngster singing along to the Police's Message in a Bottle. The example stung a bit. The Police broke up before I was born, yet I've been humming their songs my whole life. Of course, when I was listening to my parents' records in the 90s, no one was measuring the replaying of old music. Today, by contrast, every Spotify play is monitored and monetized. So might Gioia be overinterpreting data showing listening habits that have long existed? He didn't think so. In my generation, he said, nobody I know listened to their parents' music. Gioia's generation is the baby boomers, which, more than any since, conceived of itself as revolutionary. The rock and roll movement gave boomers a fresh, elders-offending sound to call their own, and as they aged, they witnessed other breakthroughs. Punk, hip-hop, electronic music. Gioia asked me to compare that dynamism with what's happened, or rather happened, in the 21st century. The music today doesn't sound that much different from 20 years ago, Gioia said. I turned that assertion over in my head. The radio does play new music that feels old, such as Sabrina Carpenter's disco bop Espresso and Benson Boone's classic rock-flavored anthem Beautiful Things, but it also plays musicians who seemed firmly planted in the present. Billie Eilish's blend of jazz and electronic music diverges from the work of any pop star before her. Shabuzi combines country music and rap in a way that, perhaps for the first time in history, doesn't feel like a joke. Reggaeton, Afro beats, and K-pop now reach English-speaking audiences to an extent that was unthinkable when traditional gatekeepers, such as major labels, Drive-Time DJs, or Rolling Stone magazine, held more sway. These developments may not be quite as paradigm-shifting as rock and roll was, but they do suggest a culture that is actively evolving. Gioia acknowledged some bright spots for culture. He's not entirely fatalistic about the status quo. He tends to view culture as moving in predictable cycles. When malaise and mediocrity reach an extreme, a revolution is likely to mount, upending the old order and installing a new one. Most people fundamentally want to have culture experiences that are mind-expanding and broaden their world, he said. If the corporations that control our culture refuse to deliver that, they will find a way around it and there will be a rebirth. We will have a new counterculture. He predicted a wave of new romanticism, emphasizing humanity over technology, and a new maximalism, art made with unbridled ambition. Joey himself is trying to help bring a revolution about, albeit in small ways. Every day he listens to hours of new music, searching for gems that the algorithms have ignored. He showed me a draft of a post recommending 9 new albums to his Substack readers. The lead image was of a young woman in a bonnet and stockings, sitting on a bed strewn with stuffed animals. This was May Simone's, if I'm not getting that right, Mai Simone's, who sings dreamy bossa nova songs in English and Japanese. I actually heard her on NPR last week, or a couple weeks ago. Joey had noted that 3 weeks after her album's release, she had only 8,700 plays on YouTube. I sometimes recommend albums that have less than 100 views, he said. To Joey, the low listenership was evidence that the record industry's efforts to smother new talents. But as I sat watching him pull up exciting find after exciting find, I started to feel oddly reassured about society's creative energy. Today's corporate behemoths may be powerful and very often craven, but they're reckoning with a force more destabilizing than Sgt. Pepper's and London Calling ever were. A fractured global audience using technology to chase their obsessions, both familiar and novel. Joey went to YouTube and loaded another video of the Australian band Glass Beams. Its members wore jeweled masks over their faces while playing intricate surf rock grooves. This band is great, and nobody's heard it, he said. How many plays has it got? He scrolled down to the answer. Top comment read, witnessed as a child after the First Indochina War forced her family to move from Vietnam to France in 1953. The art critic Dean Kissick, wearing a baggy pink polo shirt and short athletic shorts, rushed through the room, barely glancing at the art. "I don't think I can do this," he whispered to me, stifling a giggle. Kissick, 42, is a writer known in large part for his annoyance at the state of the art world. He believes we've been stuck in the long 2017 period in which anxieties related to Donald Trump and Brexit have smothered culture with moralism, navel-gazing, and conformity. Although transcendence, achieved through beauty, originality, and skill, should be the primary goal, art has become much more about messaging, raising awareness, or a kind of ambient healing of the world, he told me. In other words, where Gioia awaits a revolution, Kissick thinks we've recently lived through one, and it's made everything drearier. We'd met up so Kissick could take me on a tour of the gallery scene in Chelsea. The Dodin show, he explained, demonstrated a typical tactic among dealers these days. Find a relatively obscure figure from an underrepresented group and try to sell his or her work, at least in part, on the basis of identity. The blander the art, the better for serving rich people looking to furnish tastefully understated homes. "This is just like sofas," he said, gesturing toward Dodin's soothingly serene canvases. "Curtains." We stepped into an elevator, and I asked him whether he at least felt a sense of justice at seeing someone like Dodin exhibited at one of the most exclusive galleries in the world. "I always like to see older Asian women doing well because they remind me of my mother," said Kissick, whose mother is a Japanese immigrant to the UK. "But no, I don't see justice." Last year, Kissick published a cover story in Harper arguing that politics had all but destroyed contemporary art. Museums and galleries were blending all forms of oppression into one universal grief, he wrote. "We are bombarded with identities until they become meaningless. When everyone's tossed together into the big salad of marginalization, otherness is made banal and abstract. Fucking men." The essay opened with a shocking scene. In May of 2020, on her way to see a show at London's Barbican Art Gallery, Kissick's mother was struck by a bus. an accident that resulted in the amputation of both of her legs. Kissick flew from New York to London to visit her in the hospital. Later, as she recuperated, he checked out the show she'd been on the way to see. Titled Unraveled, it featured textile art, primarily by artists from historically marginalized communities. As Kissick noted, the curators further proposed that textiles themselves had also been marginalized, having been gendered as feminine and regarded as craft rather than fine art. The show's introductory text asked, "What does it mean to imagine a needle, a loom, or a garment as a tool of resistance?" Kissick's assessment was withering. It was the most depressing exhibition I had ever seen at the gallery. Hardly worth a visit, let alone losing one's legs. While Unravel pretended to be politically radical, even revolutionary, it didn't seem to stand for much beyond liberal orthodoxy and feel-good ambient diversity. It offered fantasies of resistance, but had little to offer in terms of genuine, substantive social change or artistic experimentation. Critiquing progressive pieties in this fashion may simply sound conservative. Indeed, Kissick's complaints are now reflected in the anti-DEI wave that has swept the federal government and rippled through American corporate, cultural, and academic institutions. But Kissick insists he's not ideologically motivated. "I just don't care that much if people are very woke or very anti-woke," he told me. "The conversation itself just takes up way too much space." And here's Mr. Kissick himself. "That conversation has been as impossible to avoid in pop culture as it has been in high culture. Proponents of the theory that representation matters, meaning that more inclusive media will create a more inclusive society, may have cheered diversity cast remakes of such films as The Little Mermaid, body positivity choruses sung by artists like Lizzo, and reckonings with perceived cultural appropriation in the literary world. But conservatives, in turn, have organized a backlash, attempting to score ideological points by racking up streams and downloads. When Jason Aldean's 2023 song, Try That in a Small Town, was criticized by some on the left for tacitly endorsing lynching, a right-wing campaign to support the track resulted in Aldean hitting #1 on the Hot 100. Similar campaigns boosted the box office prominence of films such as the anti-DEI mockumentary Am I Racist? Even the most escapist forms of entertainment, blockbusters, pop concerts, children's TV, are now treated like political battlegrounds, though you rarely hear about anyone's opinions being changed in the skirmishes. In the world of fine art, Kissick feels overwhelmed by what he sees as cynicism masquerading as idealism. He mentioned the example of Amoko Biafo, an in-demand I'm sorry. I'm sorry to these people. I can't read your names correctly. Amoko Boafo, an in-demand Ghanaian painter who was hired to adorn the nose cone of shared future we hope to create. Mediocre art really does get overrated on account of its politics. Any working critic knows how factional and reflexive audiences have become. Pan a woman and many readers will call you sexist. Champion one and you risk being dismissed as a beta cuck. Such reactions don't just represent the persistence of prejudice, they reflect an awareness of the way that culture, a supposedly binding force, has come to feel more and more like embittered sports rivalry. But any working critic will also tell you that topicality and identity have inspired incredible work in previous eras. Just listen to Nina Simone. And recently, watch the post-Me Too masterpiece Tar, about a lesbian orchestra conductor accused of misconduct. By the way, maybe my favorite movie of the last 10 years. I love me some Lydia Tarr. Lydia Tarr will return. Even Kissick acknowledges this. He gushed to me about the artist Arthur Jafa's 2021 video installation. I don't know if I'm supposed to read this. AGHDRA. Its depiction of an ominous, undulating seascape evokes, as the artist told Art News, the feeling of being chained in a slave ship. Kissick even had words for Salman Tor, a much-typed Pakistani artist in New York who makes green-gray impressionistic smudges of queer guys hanging out in bars or apartments. Tor typifies one of Kissick's least favorite pairings, old-school technique with a 21st century identity-related twist. But at least, Kissick said, he can really paint. The culture we have is so obsessed with ourselves, with people's identities and personalities. As we hustled from gallery to gallery, popping in for mere minutes and then leaving, I began to get the sense that Kissick's grudge against the art world goes deeper than politics. He deemed a colorful painting of motocross riders rubbish. A huge haunting sculpture of a half-dressed woman with blurred features, as if rendered by rudimentary CGI, received just a murmured, "Cool." At one point, he acknowledged his jadedness. As you can probably tell, I've seen too many white cube shows of paintings in my life. He said, there's too much art. This is an interesting picture by Javier Jada. This problem, if it can be called one, has escalated since around the time Kissick graduated from art school in 2010. Back then, he felt visual art was crossing over to become a mainstream cultural phenomenon. Jay-Z was rapping about collecting Basquiat's, and Louis Vuitton was making handbags with the Japanese visual artist Takashi Murakami. The internet, it appeared, was encouraging audiences beyond the walls of galleries and museums to develop an interest in art. But hope for technologically enabled creative flourishing gave way to an oversaturation and numbness. So-called zombie formalism, rehashed abstract expressionism optimized for Instagram shareability, became a fad. Minimalism, a presumed antidote to the chaos of online life, became the default aesthetic in art, fashion, and consumer product design. It's been clear for a while that art's running out of ideas, Kissick declared in a 2021 column for The Spectator. This overvaluing of stale, activism-scented art is a symptom of all this burnout. If stylistic innovation can no longer break through the noise, we're only left to argue over subject matter. What would a better direction be? Kissick's cagey on the question, but he has a few ideas. Art should capture its era, he said, but the culture wars are not the only important thing about the 2020s. Rather, he wants art to address the internet's more ineffable consequences, rendering our thought processes glitchy, destabilizing our sense of self. He thinks artists should find new ways to use time-honored techniques, while also being open to experimenting with emerging tools, including AI. The experience of being alive this century has changed dramatically, he said. We should engage with the times we live in, and then maybe we'd feel less hopeless about everything. What he really seems to be yearning for is a paradigm shift, some sort of formal leap forward combined with a spiritual reawakening. The culture we have is so obsessed with ourselves, with people's identities and personalities, he said. Perhaps we'll be able to transcend that somehow. Perhaps we will get over this deeply individualistic, deeply self-obsessed moment. He paused. But I don't know how that will happen. Ooh, can I read that again? That was fucking great. What he really seems to be I'm going to read this. Hang on. Let me take a water because I just want to read this again because I love this. What he really seems to be I can't do it. What he really seems to be yearning for is a paradigm shift. Some sort of formal leap forward combined with a spiritual reawakening. The culture we have is so obsessed with ourselves, with people's identities and personalities, he said. Perhaps we'll be able to transcend that somehow. Perhaps we will get over this deeply individualistic, deeply self-obsessed moment. He paused, but I don't know that will happen, or how that will happen. Amen. Let's see if anybody is commenting before I go on. I know this is a long article, but I just love it. Nope, I think we're good. Hang on, let me just see. No, we're all good. I will continue to read if anybody's even watching this anymore. Look, man, I wanted to read this because I thought it was really interesting and worth sharing. Isolation. KMUN FM 91.9, a public radio station for the coastal town of Astoria, Oregon, broadcasts from a 133-year-old Victorian cottage with burgundy eaves and stained glass windows. One rainy day last spring, I was greeted there by the 41-year-old musician and writer Jamie Brooks, who wore a tweed jacket over a T-shirt emblazoned with the slogan, "Foresight prevents blindness." She introduced me to a variety of friendly station volunteers working in studios cluttered with stacks of vinyl records, spindles of CDs, and well-worn instruments and mixing boards. On one wall hung a hand-drawn map of the station's broadcasting area. It was a strikingly analog setting in which to meet an artist who once embodied the internet's futuristic potential. Best known for her work under the aliases Elite Gymnastics and Default Genders, Brooks has long been a bedroom musician, someone who uses a home computer to make high-quality recordings. In the early 2010s, as a 20-something immersed in the hipster party scene in Minneapolis, Brooks collaborated with a friend to release a few ethereal dance songs that drew the acclaim of some music bloggers. She was soon dating the similarly buzzy artist Grimes and living in Los Angeles, getting a close-up look at the modern pop ecosystem. But these days, her mics and guitar are packed up in boxes, gathering dust. Spending time working on new songs just doesn't feel right, given her belief, articulated in widely circulated tweets and essays, that the music industry is doomed. Like Gioia, Brooks feels that tech and business interests are strangling the arts. Like Kissick, she believes that most of the new work that gets made today just flat out isn't good. But Brooks' view is even darker than either of theirs and more explicitly personal. She described the future of music to me in one word: wreckage. Many musicians believe that Spotify's business model is predatory, forcing artists to participate in a system in which they make only a fraction of a penny whenever a song is played. Brooks agrees, but her concern runs deeper than the money itself. She argues that music's role in society has been corrupted. Streaming encourages artists to play an enervating game of scale. The more songs they release, the more chance they have of going viral and turning pittances into real income. Artists are thus motivated to record as quickly and cheaply as possible. All of this, Brooks believes, has led to a glut of music, both popular and obscure, that is plainly bad, less distinct, less soulful, and less skillfully made than the minimal standards of the previous eras. Nobody can get the resources to develop their craft, she said. I feel that way about the movie industry. This decline in quality has created the conditions for what Brooks fears will come next: a flood of AI-generated songs that further devalue music as an art form and an economic enterprise. Already, streaming platforms have inculcated a huge demand for utility music, such as white noise to fall asleep to and chill beats to study to. Cheap AI tools can now conjure credible versions of such music, and over time they're only going to get better at imitating other styles. Listeners' standards have become so diminished, they won't be able to tell the difference. Brooks saw the early stages of this catastrophe unfolding during her time in Los Angeles. While we chatted, she casually mentioned being on set at a Lady Gaga video shoot and watching Ezra Koenig of Vampire Weekend play songs in his backyard. But to hear her describe it, her LA years were mostly disillusioning. I really didn't see a lot of success that I thought seemed desirable, she said. It's like a lot of people are sitting in rooms by themselves ordering fucking Uber Eats. What she meant is that the ethos of the bedroom musician, once an indie phenomenon enabling outsiders to gain a foothold, quickly became the record industry default. Producers can skip the studio to work on their devices at home, commissioning instrumentalists and beat makers who live time zones away. Music is now widely made much in the manner that is consumed, by people who are alone, encased in their headphones. This state of affairs, Brooks thinks, is antithetical to music's purpose. Listening to songs once meant getting a window into specific communal circumstances, into the churches where R&B evolved from gospel, into the block parties where hip-hop fermented, into clubs where rock bands jammed. Now most music is shaped by and tailored to a fake place, an intangible scene, the internet. It only feeds the broadcast it only feeds the broader trends of cultural fracturing and personal solitude that are now clearly depressing people's sense of well-being. I share the feeling that the mundanity of streaming has made music feel smaller, less important than it used to, but I see plenty of signs that the art form still serves a social function. One of the biggest stories in the record industry in the 2020s has been the boom of country music, a style that's rooted in a sense of place and shared identity. New stars such as Zach Bryan and Lainey Wilson have been drawing droves not just to stream songs, but to sell out their tour dates and tailgate in the parking lot. New honky-tonks have been popping up across the nation, even in blue states. There's still human culture that is being mined there, Brooks said, when we got to talking about country music. She pointed out that Taylor Swift's success owes a lot to her having come up in Nashville, writing on a guitar with seasoned songwriters, thus giving her skills that feel rarer with each passing year. But Brooks sees the country renaissance as a mere side effect of the genre being late to technological adoption, which isn't the same as defying it. Streaming is taking longer to eat it, she said, but streaming will destroy it. Eventual destruction is, in her view, the fate of most everything good about music and the broader artistic landscape. Gioia's boom and bust trend forecasts, Kissack's pining for creative reinvention, both sound naive in Brooks' analysis. When people use this language, oh, it all moves in cycles, it's been going this way since time immemorial. No, it hasn't, she said. Like in Joe Biden's lifetime, the sheet music industry was completely replaced by the record industry. And in our lifetime already, the practice of buying copies of records has been replaced by the concept of renting access to them. In other words, great things don't just change. They die. And what they're replaced with may well be worse, if they're replaced at all. As she wrote on Substack in 2023, the history of the record business is not a story about rejuvenating cycles of natural death and destined rebirth. It's a story about old, outmoded tech companies chasing diminishing returns. The path we're on is a spiral, not a circle, and it's getting smaller and narrower as we get closer to the end. Hearing all of this has made me particularly sad because Brooks' own music has always seemed like an example about searching for connection in a world made cold by technology, greed, and to quote one lyric, crypto dipshits. The music was electronic yet felt handcrafted, and Brooks, singing through a warbly vocal filter, sounded like a human trying to escape being turned into a machine. For now, though, Brooks has put her music career on hold. The process of moving notes around on a computer screen alone started to feel masturbatory. A successful new album would generate a bunch of value for Apple, for Spotify, for whatever other companies are taking pieces, she said, and I don't feel good about that. Now she's been spending her days hanging out at KMUN, learning about the seemingly outmoded technology of terrestrial radio, which she thinks will gain a kind of post-apocalyptic usefulness to humanity as the internet is overrun with AI slop. I tend to believe that, actually. Still, Brooks can't stop dreaming of new music she wants to make. She described one song idea that's been rattling around in her head lately. It's got horn solos. It's got, like, the Andrews sisters backing vocals in the chorus. I suggested to her that she might benefit from a new record deal to bring that vision to life. Well, no, Brooks replied. What she's lacking is collaborators, real-life bandmates, bonded by shared experiences with physical instruments and the skills to use them. I need people. I need people who care. Each declinist I spoke with made a convincing case that large inexorable forces were wearing culture down, but they also left me clinging to scattered counterexamples that might tell another story. I'd seen the omens of death. I needed to make an effort to find signs of life, which is how I ended up sweating in a poorly ventilated indoor skate park in Brooklyn one summer night. I was there for a concert thrown by Nobels, a hip-hop-focused blog that bills itself as a hub of the wider internet underground. Young people sat on either side of a half-pipe, looking like members of a very eclectic tribunal. They wore jorts and crop tops or strappy S&M-influenced get-ups or pajamas emblazoned with cartoons. They fiddled with phones, lighters, Nintendo DSs, and in one case, a unicycle. At the bottom of the half-pipe, a mosh pit swirled around a small stage. Two rappers shouted over a beat that paired incessant synthetic clapping with a sample of Somewhere Over the Rainbow played on a ukulele. Within the scrum by the stage was Kieran Press Reynolds, a 25-year-old journalist who seems like he should be a declinist, but isn't. His father, the music critic Simon Reynolds, wrote the 2011 book Retromania, Pop Culture's Addiction to Its Own Past, which puzzled over the abundance of remixes, remakes, and revivals in the 2000s and made an early version of the stagnation argument now espoused by Gioia and others. Press Reynolds himself has made a budding career out of chronicling internet subcultures that seem symptomatic of a society in crisis. When we met, he'd recently reported a story for the New York Times about a video game that satirizes online influencers by making players experience horrific things for content. For GQ, he delved into the looks-maxing community, young men who, among other techniques for optimizing their physical attractiveness, try to alter their faces by clenching their jaw for hours a day, egged on by internet forums that are, he wrote, cesspits of insecurities. And yet, Press Reynolds is energized by the culture right now. Maybe there aren't amazing macro trends at the moment, he told me, but if you scratch the surface of the mainstream, people are cooking. As a critic, he feels an obligation to spread the good news. Every young person deserves something to champion, he said, something to get really feverishly excited about. Press Reynolds keeps his brown hair long and scraggly. His voice is hoarse and giddy. He described his own artistic obsessions in terms of such as fried and anarchic. In music, on TikTok, and even in web design trends, he sees a turn toward an aesthetic he called max stimuli, which pushes the bounds of speed, dissonance, and silliness while recombining bits of old culture into something new. It feels like how our brains feel now, infested and congested with so much stuff, he said. He's particularly captivated by the hip-hop underground, a constellation of subgenres such as rage rap, which takes after the unintelligible lyrics and glitchy beats of cult hero Playboi Carti, and plugnum, a woozy, was that how you pronounce that? Plugnum? I don't know. A woozy melodic version of trap. A global community of producers swapping beats and software plugins online is twisting hip-hop's conventions to create sound sculpture that Press Reynolds thinks really could have come out 10 years ago. Or really could not have come out 10 years ago. He mentioned a recent SoundCloud micro hit called Fragged Ought by an artist named Woke Ups. The song makes you think of a human expanding and deflating like an accordion, Press Reynolds said. I pulled up the track after we talked. A heavily filtered voice ululated about money and guns for 2 minutes over a swell of digital sound. The effect was weirdly beautiful. It gave me goosebumps. Other genres are also getting scrambled in disorienting, playful ways. I've been fascinated by hyperpop, a loose term for the punkish, noisy spin that bedroom electronic musicians put on bubblegum tropes. In 2024, hyperpop had its commercialized breakthrough with Charlie XCX's, what is that, 10, I don't know what that is. I can't read that Roman numeral. Is that 15? XCX, let's go with that. Album Brat, whose frenzied rhythms became popular enough to be adopted by the official memes of Kamala Harris's presidential campaign. Brooks had warned me not to put too much stock in internet-native music scenes. She dismissed most hyperpop as regurgitated video game soundtracks made by and for people who have never been to clubs. This has struck me as uncharitable, though, and talking with Press Reynolds, I realized it wasn't entirely untrue. He traced his own teenage musical awakening to playing Minecraft while listening to hip-hop set to anime montages on YouTube. His culture critic parents, his mother is a writer for the Joy Press, would play the slick beats of Daft Punk around the house, but he gravitated toward the blown-out distortion of angsty rappers such as XXXTentacion. When the pandemic lockdown came, he burrowed even deeper into the digital wilds. Being so online, Press Reynolds joked, had inflicted him with brain rot. He makes no apologies for being a music critic who almost can't bear to listen to full albums. Sometimes he'll just play a song for 30 seconds to feel that texture. This admission pained me a bit. I felt my own attention span decaying in recent years, but I still cling to the idea that transcendent art and transcendent experiences with art requires sustained focus. In many ways, the problem that Gioia, Kissick, and Brooks spelled out were problems of terminally distracted audiences preferring junk, recycled IP, political bait, wallpaper music, to quality. What are we going to do about brain rot? At the skate park concert, it occurred to me that art itself might be the answer. The headliner was a trio, the rapper Polo Perks and Ayuli, with the rapper-producer Fear Dorian, who hailed respectively from New York, Milwaukee, and Atlanta, but had linked up online and developed in-person friendships. Their songs deployed samples, emo rock, MIA, gaming music, with a kind of elegant dizziness, as if multiple browser tabs playing random audio were harmonizing together. A thwack on every eighth note, the signature beat of the recently ascendant Milwaukee rap scene, created a sense of Energizer Bunny propulsion. Sweating at the bottom of the half pipe, pressed up against the crowd, I felt the music meet my own sense of distraction and supplant it. These artists had burst from the internet to convey feelings about friendship, partying, and hustling. The classic hip-hop rush, delivered with a sound that suits to its times. Afterward, I thought of the concerts in the 1981 documentary The Decline of Western Civilization, which followed the grungy anti-establishment scene forming around hardcore punk bands such as Black Flag. Its title evoked Oswald Spengler and played as a joke about the way elders often disdain culture developments they don't understand. The 62-year-old Simon Reynolds sometimes feel like one of those baffled elders. He told me that much of the music his son champions is too gnarly for his ears. Still, seeing Press Reynolds chasing the latest convolution, the latest mutant in music, was a thrill. It's like what he used to do. His heyday of exploration was the 90s, when the rise of electronica, techno, drum and bass, and yes, Daft Punk seemed as exciting to a young Reynolds as rock and roll had to the boomers. Then he got older, the 2000s came around, and his generation of ravers started to lose steam. No comparable new scene seemed to be taking place, so he wrote Retromania about the feeling that culture had become too backward-looking. Soon after, one of his good friends, the late Mark Fisher, wrote a similarly themed essay, The Slow Cancellation of the Future, that has become one of the 21st century's most influential statements of cultural pessimism. Ooh, I got to read that. The Slow Cancellation of the Future. Hang on. But some of Reynolds' bleakest theories, he told me, started to crumble a bit once they were published. Technologies such as streaming and social media began to upend the culture. Press Reynolds kept discovering interesting oddities online. He realized that he'd been thinking of artistic evolution too narrowly. Innovation was happening, it just wasn't the kind he'd been looking for. I was very, very fixated in that book on sound, he told me. He now believes music is about more than sound. It, and culture in general, is a messy hybrid of images, ideas, delivery methods, and so much else. From that perspective, this decade's culture is plenty dynamic. The great media of the 20th century, the art pop album, the feature-length film, the gallery show, the literary novel, may be fighting for their life, but that's because of competition from new forms, defined by a sense of immediacy, short-form video, chatty podcasts, video games, memes. Like the old media, these forms foster tons of mediocrity, but they also invite surprising excellence. The minute-long songs of Pink Panthers, which glitter with detail and emotion. The writing of Honor Levy, who weaves lurid short stories out of internet slang. It's more of an aphorist culture than an essayist culture, isn't it? Reynolds said. You can say quite clever, profound things in just a few sentences. This sensibility emerged from the warrens of the internet, but it's bleeding into the mainstream and in the best cases, energizing it. When Press Reynolds described his idea of max stimuli to me, I thought back to a term Gioia had used, new maximalism. In Gioia's analysis, the greats of his lifetime, Brian Wilson, Stephen Sondheim, Joni Mitchell, have been maximalists, translating grand ambitions into pop symphonies, stage spectacles, or emotionally dense story songs. The cultural triumph of this decade fit that model. Audiences still want storytelling they can chew on. They just want it in a form that's attuned to the accelerated ways we now consume information. Artists are playing with tempo, intensity, and scale to tame the modern attention span, offer smart social commentary, and foster a feeling of connection in an era of isolation. Think back to the summer of 2023 when Barbie and Oppenheimer both accomplished what the pandemic had seemingly made impossible, selling out movie theaters, and not for a superhero sequel. These could have been emblems of Hollywood's intellectual bankruptcy, representing a glorified toy ad and yet another Oscar-baiting biopic. Yet the movies connected in large part because of their daring use of rhythm, visual rhythm, emotional rhythm, narrative rhythm. With hyper-pop-ish glee, Barbie veered between musical, slapstick, comedy, and melodrama. Its pursuit of constant stimulation didn't just keep audiences rapt. The movie breezily conveyed weighty ideas about gender, consumerism, and even the meaning of life. Oppenheimer, about the father of the atomic bomb, was more quietly radical. The director, Christopher Nolan, told a complex story by montaging lots of vignette-like TikTok-length scenes. Here was a sober, stately Best Picture winner whose hummingbird pulse felt stylish and modern. It's probably one of the most important lessons to take away from this article. Across culture, identity, Kissick's bugbear, remains central, but its role may be changing. Forward-thinking, maximalist 2020s art is less about sorting people into tribes than about deconstructing now familiar labels. The joyfully chaotic 2022 action comedy hit Everything Everywhere All at Once, about a dimension-hopping Chinese family, used a sci-fi concept to complicate the category of immigrant, reminding viewers that any of us could have lived a million different lives. Meanwhile, Beyoncé has been making the boldest music of her career, which is saying a lot, by trying to expand popular ideas about black music. First with the 2022 album Renaissance, a collage of beats linking hip-hop, Afro beats, and house music, and then with 2024's Cowboy Carter, a twisty-turny odyssey into country and rock. If audiences have become numb to moralistic messaging, they seem excited by works that use formal experimentation to capture messy truths. I would offer Sinners as something like that. The technologically induced isolation that Brooks worries about is also driving humanistic counter-movements. The art of confessional songwriting is flourishing thanks to a wave of artists, Chappell Roan, Olivia Rodrigo, SZA, whose lyrical candor creates an intense sense of closeness between listener and artist. Together, these artists constitute an idea of pop that's anything but generic. Rather, it's witty, specific, and vulnerable. The leader of this class is, of course, Taylor Swift, who's been pioneering a futuristic form of storytelling. Every verse and every public utterance links together an intricate web of lore, which brings fans together for puzzle solving and reinterpretation. Gioia, hardly the stereotype of a Swiftie, told me he watched the concert film about her record-smashing Eras tour 3 times. I take some comfort in the fact that the biggest musical event of last year was Taylor Swift going on the road playing real songs for real people in concert, Gioia said. AI may be able to imitate Swift's voice, but it can't forge social bonds like she can. Maximalist wave naturally favors all the well-resourced, and an actual renaissance won't be possible until the economics of streaming are reformed or upended. Even so, indie artists are still releasing fantastical concept albums whose worlds spill out into music videos, TikToks, and other online channels. Check out Magdalena Bay or Underscores, and indie filmmakers are finding audiences for uncompromising visions. See the recent Oscar race between The Brutalist and Anora. Even seemingly brain-rotted content can sustain big ideas through inventive means. Internet comedians such as Psionic use costumes and visual filters to conjure bizarro characters that pop up in your social feeds, creating long-form satire out of snackable moments. When I'm locked in and enjoying such highlights of 2020 culture, I'm grateful. Most of this work couldn't or wouldn't have existed before now. That doesn't mean I'm immune to the dread that plagues the declinists. They're really talking about forces deeper than culture. Technological, political, economic, and social problems that require technological, political, and economic and social answers. The same YouGov survey that found Americans to be so unhappy with the state of movies, TV, and music found that people also generally feel that this is the decade with the worst economy, the least moral society, the least close-knit communities, and the most political division. What art can do is remind us that our lives are not simply shaped by systems. They're also a product of our own thoughts, inspirations, and relations. My favorite new TV show of the decade is HBO's Fantomas, a comedy created by former Saturday Night Live writer Julio Torres. It's a magical, realist depiction of a near future in which people live with bumbling AI assistant bots in housing complexes owned by corporations such as Bank of America. Torres' character wants to make surreal films about animals, but is being pressured to cash in on his backstory as a gay immigrant. A streaming service run by Zappos, yes, the show company, commissions a screenplay called How I Came Out to My Abuela. The subject matter asks quite darkly whether the artistic spirit can survive modern life. But this imaginative way the show is rendered in a dreamscape of interconnected skits featuring handcrafted set decoration performed by talents from today's offbeat comedy world offers a hopeful answer. Culture is not just a map of the structures and forces that order our society. It's what people make on top of that. On top of, in between, in opposition to, and in collaboration with those things. We all have the power to listen more curiously, to look more closely, and to treat the present with the same sense of generosity that we extend to the golden ages of the past. When you tune in to the creativity that is still pulsing in these disorienting times, you can hear the story that most needs telling. Keep going. That article is by Spencer Kornhaber, and I read the entire thing. So, as you know, I don't even know if anyone's watching this show. Again, it was published in The Atlantic today, and I just found it so interesting. I mean, a lot of pessimism, but a lot of, it depends where you look for it. And I think part of the question is, obviously I was thinking about this because of Thunderbolts. Thunderbolts is the 36th MCU movie. 36 in the entirety of human history. I mean, we've only had movies, really, sound movies, for a little over 100 years now. Actually, a little less than 100 years, to be honest. And yet, we're now looking to the MCU to give us what exactly? Transcendence? Is it supposed to change our lives? I watched Thunderbolts, and I enjoyed it for what it was. I didn't have really any expectations at all. I know that I was curious, is it going to lead into Fantastic Four? But I was surprised that if that was the only MCU movie and it had these little connections, which would have been interesting, I would have found Thunderbolts to be an interesting film, anchored by Florence Pugh's performance. And yet we're talking about these things. Like, I was having a conversation. I really like all the people I stream with on Chris Gore's Versus show. I like everybody's opinions. But we're having this conversation about what a superhero movie is supposed to be. And I'm like, we've gotten 36 of these movies. I don't want them to be what they've always supposed to be. I want to see something new. I think the unfortunate part, and I was explaining that I think that they forgot that they need to keep reinventing the MCU. And, if I had made the MCU, what they built, you assume that you're building from one thing to the next. Like, that's how they gave it to us. At the end of the first Iron Man, we meet Nick Fury, and he tells Tony Stark about the Avengers Initiative. And it was exciting. Like, oh, we're now talking about where we are going with the Avengers Initiative. And over the course of the entire Infinity Saga, this idea that Tony Stark had of protecting, now we live in a larger world. We know about Asgard. We know that there's stuff happening in outer space. Tony Stark smartly says, let's build a suit of armor around the world. And that backfired in Avengers Age of Ultron. And over the course of the entire Infinity Saga, his desire to do that didn't really work out like he thought it would. And yet, at the end of Endgame, we're left, with what he hoped to do. He lost his life doing it, but we were able to stop Thanos, reverse what he'd done, basically saved literally half the universe. Now, what I find interesting about what Marvel did, because I really love there were 22 movies. Spider-Man Far From Home is considered the end of the Infinity Saga. So that's the 23rd Marvel movie. The big mistake that I think Marvel made in terms of what they were going to do, the idea of having a multiverse saga that comes on the heels of the Infinity Saga was, I think, probably a good idea. They just didn't think it through. Now, what if instead of Doctor Strange casting a spell or whatever, at the end of what happened with Thanos, and this has always bothered me about the MCU, is they've never dealt with the ramifications of what happened. Like, when all this, there had to have been consequences to expel that much energy. They alluded to it, but what if it was, call it the sacred timeline, you want to do the multiverse? What if the Thanos using his power, but us using his power again, it was in reversing what Thanos did. It was us. It was the heroes. I'm Iron Man. That's what cracked the universe open. Because we brought everybody back, but were there any consequences for that? There should have been. If you follow if you're going to keep going with the idea now is, it was the heroes that started the multiverse that cracked open the universes and fucked everything up. That's where it should have gone. And the next movie, I understand why they made a Black Widow film, but that was the first movie. You're literally Iron Man 1 begins everything, and at the end of it, it promises we're moving forward. Black Widow was a film that just halted everything in its tracks. If you were going to start a multiverse saga, your next movie should have been laying that groundwork. Maybe you could have introduced a new character, a brand new character. I don't know who that would have been. But you realize that, oh my God, and you start showing the universe collapsing, ripping open, I don't know what, but something. And building upon that and figuring, I know they had to change things, their plans with Kang. You know what, though? I don't think they ever really had a handle on it. You hear about what Kevin Feige was thinking. You can tell. The 14 movies, beginning with Far From Home, post-Infinity Saga, none of them hold together. It's all kind of haphazard. Not one has led to another. You should have been building. I mean, obviously now they had to make a big pivot because of Jonathan Majors and the Kang storyline, but that storyline was never thought through very well anyway. You know, you're now making one of the biggest things happening. Why wasn't the Loki TV series a movie? You know, Loki becoming the god of stories or whatever. You know, that should have been, it would have been really interesting that instead of after the Infinity Saga, you made a Loki movie, you thought he was dead, he turns out not to be, and that's when you started the Infinity Saga, and he's the one that discovers the universe was cracked. But who am I? And, you know, it's ridiculous because that's not what happened. But I think that was a huge mistake, and I think it was a mistake because it got too successful. They wanted to start their own streaming service, which they did, and Marvel had to put a lot of its effort into making all these shows because they thought of it as a brand instead of something that needed to be curated and grown and built. They should have gone back to square one, Marvel did. But that's what happens when you're dealing with things like algorithms and when you become successful. The last thing anybody wants to do is like, okay, let's go back to basics and start over. You know, you've got the Infinity Saga, like, ooh, boom, you end with Infinity War and Endgame. You should have gone back and be like, okay, we're going to start with Iron Man 1 again. You know, we're going to contract and be smaller. But how can you do that when you're making hundreds of millions of dollars? Nobody's going to do that. Nobody in their right mind. But they should, because then you build again. You build. We should be theoretically, waiting for Avengers Doomsday and Avengers Secret Wars, and it should be like the greatest thing ever. Nobody cares. I'm sorry, nobody cares. I saw Thunderbolts, and I'm surrounded by hot toys and omnibuses and all kinds of Marvel stuff. Love it. I have no interest. Fantastic Four hasn't convinced me either. I hope Fantastic Four is good. I really want it to be good. I have no interest, and you're giving me an Avengers movie that is built on an unearned gimmick. It's been unearned. If you had planned out something, and I know, but if you had planned out something and revealed, like you planted, like however, I mean, the idea that Robert Downey Jr., if he's not tied to Tony Stark in any way, shape, or form, it's bizarre that they have him playing. I mean, he was the anchor, the center of the MCU. Now you've made him the center villain. It's a gimmick. It can't ever be anything other than a gimmick. So if you're going to do that and make it work, you needed to carefully construct all of that during the phases 4, 5, and 6. Because now, even with Fantastic Four, I am dubious. There has not been one scene, the idea that there's 2 scenes that we've seen. The best scene in the Fantastic Four trailers that we've seen so far is them finding out Sue Storm is pregnant. You're late? And they make that joke about, yeah, I'm late for my period and I'm late for dinner. But there's no scene. We haven't seen anybody. There's been no heroic scenes. It's like familial stuff. Why do we care? How are you going to make that Fantastic Four movie? Okay, I guess I'm back. I don't know what YouTube is doing to me, to be honest. Anyway, I was in the middle of a rant. Now I don't know where I was. Anyway, this is the problem with a lot of our pop culture, is that all the things that we love, Star Wars was created by one dude, and he started his own company, Lucasfilm. He had to go to 20th Century Fox to get money. Now it's owned by a corporation. And when all of our pop culture becomes desirable and owned by corporations don't make it. They then have to go find people to do it. And there's no brain trust at corporations that know how to pick these things. Anyway, I'm off my game now. Let me see if anybody has sent anything in. Dalton B says, Rob, if you get a chance, look into the band Kleenex Girl Wonder. 24 or so albums from 94 all the way to the present day. Check out Let It Buffer. Austrian History says, got another one, Rob. OG SOS. Diamond on the list. Wait, what are you talking about, SOS? I don't know. Are you talking about the giant is that what you're talking about? Or not? Don't know. I got that trilogy, the Diamond trilogy, if that's what you're talking about. Stub McShave says, one of the reasons that people are mostly talking about Star Wars and Marvel is because it's one of the few common touchstones in pop culture. I agree. The media in the time of streaming is too fractured. The death of music stores and video stores have contributed to that. I totally agree. Laserbeam Hawkins has been a member for 14 months. Yeah. Well, anyway, guys, this has been a long stream. I've been going on for a long time. I think I'm going to end this stream because I don't know why I keep getting, they keep kicking me off. It's incredibly frustrating. But anyway, hey, you know what? This went on for a long time, considering I wasn't going to even do a stream tonight. So tell me what you think of the article. I know it's a long article. If you stuck with me, thank you. I appreciate it. Go down in the comments, make a comment. What do you think of pop culture now? What are some of the things that you really like now that aren't Marvel and Star Wars? Tell me what books you like. Tell me what are your favorite video games. Tell me what comics you're reading. What shows that are off the beaten path. Tell me it all. Give it to me, and I want to hear it. Anyway, I want to thank everybody for being here. And I want to thank everybody for generously supporting this channel via Super Chats, tips, and memberships. We have member calls every other week. We had a great one this weekend where we hang out for 3 or 4 hours and just chat. All you new members to the channel, please join us. I mean, I love my members, but we don't see a lot of new people hang out. Come on down. You're the next contestant on, well, I wish we had a price that was right, but hey. Anyway, remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. And all you have to do is listen. And with that, I say to everybody, have a better day, have a better night. And remember, if you're interested in my latest work, which is, of course, True Noir, the Assassination of Anton Cermak, the fully immersive audio drama, 4.5 hours long, you can get it at truenoir.co right now. truenoir.co. And hey, it's got some of your favorite actors in it, and you'll recognize many of the voices. It's a noir story set in 1932 Chicago, where Jeffrey Combs, Dr. Herbert West himself, Weyoun, and Shran from Star Trek. I just got the Ignite new 40th anniversary Reanimator in 4K. It's amazing. Got it today in the mail. So check it out, and tell me what you think of that. I'll see you guys later.